Rejected Omega sheltered 20 starving wolves for one night. At dawn, Alpha King did the unthinkable. The howl that tore through the Ashwood territory that night was not one of hunting or celebration. It was the sound of a young woman's world, ending in front of hundreds of witnesses. Lyra stood in the center of the pack circle, snow falling around her shoulders, as Alpha Cade's voice rang out over the crowd. "I reject you as my mate." The words landed like stones dropped into still water. Every wolf present froze. Some gasped, a few whispered behind gloved hands. Lyra felt her knees threaten to buckle, but she forced herself to remain standing, chin lifted, even as her chest cracked open from the inside. She had known something was wrong for weeks. Cade had grown distant, cold, avoiding her eyes at pack meals, disappearing for hours without explanation. She had told herself it was the pressure of leadership, the weight of protecting the territory during a tense season. She had told herself many things to avoid the truth that now stood undeniable before her. The pack elders did not intervene. The betas did not speak up. Even Cade's own mother, who had once embraced Lyra like a daughter, turned her face away. An Omega who has been rejected by her Alpha loses everything that came with that bond. Her home within the packlands, her place at the shared table, her voice in pack matters. It is not written in any law that she must leave, but tradition presses harder than law ever could. Lyra understood, standing there in the snow, that she was no longer welcome. She did not cry. Not yet. She would not give them that. Instead, she turned, walked through the parting crowd, and did not look back at the man who had once promised to stand beside her for the rest of her life. The walk to the edge of the territory took nearly an hour. The temperature had dropped sharply since sundown, and the wind cut through her thin ceremonial dress, the one she had worn because tonight was supposed to be a celebration of her bond, not the destruction of it. Her boots crunched over frozen ground as she made her way toward the old cabin that had belonged to her grandmother, the only piece of property that remained hers and hers alone, untouched by pack politics. The cabin sat just past the boundary line, tucked between two ridges of dense pine trees. It was small, weathered by years of harsh winters, but it was solid. Her grandmother had built a life there long before joining the pack, and something about its quiet solitude had always comforted Lyra as a child. She never imagined she would need that comfort as an adult, alone, with nothing but the clothes on her back and the ache of humiliation pressing against her ribs. When she finally reached the door, her hands were shaking so badly, it took her 3 attempts to turn the old iron key hidden beneath the loose porch board. Inside, the air was stale and cold, but at least it was still, at least it was hers. She lit the fireplace with trembling fingers, feeding it kindling, until a small flame caught and grew. She wrapped herself in a wool blanket she found folded in a cedar chest, and sat before the fire, staring into it, as if it might offer an answer to the questions circling endlessly in her mind. Why? She had given Cade everything an Omega was supposed to give an Alpha: loyalty, patience, gentleness, support during his hardest decisions as a young leader. She had stood beside him during territory disputes, comforted him after difficult losses, believed in him when even his own council doubted his ability to lead. And in return, he had discarded her in front of the very people she had once called family. The wind outside grew louder as the night deepened. Lyra barely noticed. Grief has a way of drowning out the world. It was close to midnight when she first heard it, a faint scratching sound at the door, low and desperate, like something trying to claw its way toward warmth. At first, she assumed it was a branch scraping against the wood in the wind. She ignored it, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. But the sound came again, sharper this time, followed by something that sounded almost like a whimper. Lyra sat up straight, her instincts as an Omega sharpening despite her exhaustion. Omegas were known for their heightened sense of empathy, their ability to read pain and distress in others even before words were spoken. Something about that sound tightened her chest with concern rather than fear. She rose from her seat by the fire, wrapped the blanket around herself like a cloak, and approached the door with careful steps. She hesitated only a moment before unlatching it and pulling it open. The cold air rushed in, carrying with it the smell of blood and exhaustion. Lying on her porch, barely conscious, was a wolf. Not a large, healthy wolf, like the ones she had grown up around in the Ashwood pack, but a thin, trembling creature, with ribs visible beneath patchy fur and a deep gash along its hind leg. Its eyes, when they lifted weakly toward her, held something that looked disturbingly close to human desperation. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. She had grown up around shifters her entire life. She knew the difference between an ordinary wild wolf and a shifter caught between forms, too weak or too injured to fully change back. This wolf was the latter, and it was starving. Without thinking twice about her own safety, she crouched down beside it. "It's all right," she whispered, her voice soft, the way she might speak to a frightened child. "You're safe here. I won't hurt you." The wolf's ears flattened, and for a moment, it seemed ready to bolt despite its injuries. But something in Lyra's tone, in the steady calm of her presence, made it hesitate. Slowly, cautiously, it allowed her to reach toward it. She examined the wound on its leg with gentle fingers, noting that it was deep but not fatal, likely from running through the dense underbrush of the forest at high speed. Something, or someone, had chased this creature a long way. "Come inside," she said, more to herself than to the wolf, already moving to help it rise. "You need warmth." The wolf struggled to stand, favoring its injured leg, and allowed Lyra to guide it through the door, into the small cabin. She settled it near the fire on a folded blanket, watching as its trembling slowly eased in the growing warmth. She had barely finished tending to the first wound when she heard it again. The same scratching sound, this time accompanied by soft, urgent panting from just beyond the door. Lyra's heart pounded as she rose once more and opened the door. This time, there were 2 more wolves waiting on her porch, both in similarly rough condition, both watching her with wary, exhausted eyes. She did not hesitate this time. She stepped back and allowed them inside. Over the next hour, the pattern repeated itself again and again. Every time she thought the night could not bring another surprise, another scratch would sound at her door. Another set of desperate eyes would meet hers in the darkness. Some of the wolves arrived alone. Others came in small groups of 2 or 3, clearly having found each other somewhere out in the freezing forest. By the time the clock on her grandmother's mantel read 2 in the morning, Lyra's small cabin held 19 wolves, all of them thin, wounded, and shivering, despite the fire she kept feeding with every piece of wood she could find. She moved between them without rest, tearing strips of cloth from an old quilt to bind wounds, melting snow in a pot over the fire to give them water, searching her pantry for anything she could offer as food. She had little, some dried meat, a bit of bread, a jar of preserved vegetables her grandmother had left behind. But she divided it as evenly as she could, giving the weakest among them the largest portions. She did not know where these wolves had come from. She did not know why so many of them had converged on her small, isolated cabin on this particular night. But she understood, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she could not turn any of them away. Not tonight. Not after what she herself had just survived. As dawn crept closer, one final wolf arrived, the 20th, and by far the weakest of them all. This one was different from the others. Its fur held a silver sheen, even beneath the dirt and blood matting it down, and despite its exhaustion, something in the way it held itself suggested age, wisdom, perhaps even authority, among wherever pack it had come from. It did not simply collapse at her door like the others had. Instead, it looked up at her with clear, intelligent eyes the moment she opened the door, as if measuring her, studying her, before allowing itself to be helped inside. Lyra knelt beside this last wolf longer than she had with any of the others, cleaning a wound along its shoulder with careful hands. "You've been through something terrible," she murmured, more to fill the silence than anything else. "All of you have." The elder wolf's eyes held hers for a long, quiet moment, and in that moment, Lyra felt something she could not quite explain, a sense that this night, despite everything it had already stolen from her, was about to change her life in ways she could not yet imagine. Outside, the wind continued to howl through the trees, but inside the small cabin, 20 wolves lay curled together near a fire, kept alive by a woman who had lost everything just hours before, and who had chosen, in her darkest moment, to open her door anyway. The fire crackled softly as the night stretched into its final coldest hours, and Lyra sat among the sleeping wolves, too exhausted and too wired with adrenaline to close her own eyes, wondering what the morning would bring. She did not have to wonder for very long. The fire had burned low by the time Lyra finally allowed herself a moment of stillness. She sat with her back against the wall, knees pulled to her chest, watching the slow rise and fall of 20 breathing bodies, scattered across her small cabin floor. Some slept in tight curls, nose to tail, the way wolves do when seeking warmth from each other. Others lay stretched out, too exhausted to care about position or dignity. She should have been afraid. Any sensible person would have been. 20 strange wolves, clearly shifters, clearly running from something dangerous enough to leave them starved and wounded, had filled her home in the middle of the night. And yet fear was not what she felt. What she felt was something closer to purpose, a feeling she had not experienced in longer than she cared to admit. Being useful to someone, needed by someone, had always been the thing that made Lyra feel most herself. Cade's rejection had stripped that feeling away in an instant, leaving behind only emptiness. Tending to these wounded strangers, even at personal risk, had somehow begun to fill that emptiness back in. She rose quietly and moved to check on the elder wolf again, the silver-furred one, who had arrived last and weakest. Its breathing had steadied since she cleaned its wound, though it remained deeply asleep, twitching occasionally, as if caught in a troubled dream. As she knelt beside it, she noticed something she had missed before in the dim firelight. A thin band, nearly hidden beneath the fur of its foreleg, glinted faintly. It was not a hunter's trap, nor an accidental wound. It was a woven cord, deliberately tied, bearing a small emblem she did not recognize, a crescent moon, crossed by 3 lines, stitched in silver thread. Lyra frowned, running her thumb gently over the emblem. She had lived near shifter packs her entire life, and had never seen this particular symbol before. It did not belong to Ashwood. It did not belong to any of the neighboring territories she knew of either. Whatever pack these wolves belonged to, it was not local. They had traveled a great distance to end up collapsed on her porch. A soft groan from across the room pulled her attention away. One of the younger wolves, a smaller one with reddish-brown fur, had begun to stir, its body shifting restlessly. Lyra moved to its side just as its shape began to change. She had witnessed shifting before, of course. Every member of a wolf pack eventually saw the transformation between wolf and human form, whether during ceremonies, during conflict, or simply in daily pack life. But shifting while injured and exhausted was different, more painful, more vulnerable. She busied herself finding a spare blanket to offer privacy and warmth the moment the change completed. When it finished, a young man lay curled on her floor, where the wolf had been moments before, his human body just as thin and wounded as his wolf form had shown. Lyra quickly draped the blanket over him before he could fully wake to find himself exposed and disoriented in a stranger's home. His eyes opened slowly, confusion evident even in the low firelight. "Where?" he began, his voice hoarse and cracked. "Where are we?" "You're safe," Lyra said gently, kneeling a respectful distance away. "You collapsed outside my home last night. There are others here with you, 19 others." The young man's eyes widened, and he pushed himself up onto one elbow despite the clear pain it caused him. 19? All of them made it? "All 20 of you, counting yourself," Lyra confirmed. "You're the third one to shift back so far tonight." Relief flooded across his face, followed quickly by something else. Wariness, perhaps even fear. He glanced around the room at the sleeping wolves, then back at Lyra, studying her as if trying to determine what kind of person would open her home to 20 strange, starving wolves in the middle of the night. "Why did you help us?" he finally asked. Lyra considered the question longer than she expected to. "Because you needed it," she said simply, "and because I understand what it feels like to have nowhere else to go." Something shifted in the young man's expression at that, a flicker of understanding passing between them despite having only just met. He did not press further, seeming to sense that pushing for more details would be unwelcome, and instead let his head fall back against the floor, exhaustion pulling him back toward sleep, even as he fought against it. "My name is Nolan," he offered quietly, his eyes already beginning to close again. "Thank you for not turning us away." "Rest, Nolan," Lyra said softly. "There will be time for questions later." But as she watched him drift back into an uneasy sleep, she found herself wondering the very same things he likely wanted to ask her. Where had these wolves come from? What had chased them so far from wherever home used to be? And why, of all the places in the region they could have stumbled upon, had they found their way to her small, isolated cabin on the one night she happened to be there alone? She did not have answers, only more questions piling atop the ones already crowding her exhausted mind. Over the next few hours, 3 more of the wolves shifted back into human form as their bodies began to recover from the worst of their exhaustion. Each time, Lyra offered blankets, quiet reassurance, and the little food she had left. She learned bits and pieces from each of them, fragments of conversation exchanged in hushed, careful tones, as if even speaking too loudly might summon whatever danger they had fled. A woman named Elowen mentioned something about a territory dispute turning violent with frightening speed. A pair of brothers, Callan and Finn, spoke briefly of a night when their entire settlement had been forced to scatter in different directions, with no time to gather supplies or say proper goodbyes to those left behind. None of them spoke directly of who or what had caused this. Whenever the conversation edged too close to that topic, voices would drop lower, eyes would flick nervously toward the door, and the subject would shift elsewhere entirely. Lyra did not press. She recognized the particular kind of fear that made people swallow their words rather than speak a threat's name aloud, even in the safety of a stranger's home. She had seen it before in refugees who occasionally passed through Ashwood territory during her years there. Wolves fleeing conflicts in distant lands, carrying trauma too fresh and too large to put into simple sentences. Instead, she focused on what she could control. She kept the fire burning steadily through the night, rationing the wood supply carefully to ensure it would last until morning. She melted snow continuously for drinking water, since her small well pump had frozen solid hours earlier. She checked wounds periodically, cleaning and rewrapping bindings that had loosened, offering quiet words of comfort to those who woke frightened and disoriented in an unfamiliar place. By the time the darkest hours of the night finally began giving way to the faint gray promise of dawn, exhaustion had settled so deeply into Lyra's bones that she barely registered the passage of time. She moved on instinct alone, checking on the elder silver-furred wolf one final time before allowing herself to rest for even a few minutes. The elder wolf's eyes opened the moment she knelt beside it, sharp and alert despite its injuries, as though it had never truly been fully asleep at all. "You've done well," a voice said, low and rough, clearly not accustomed to speaking through a throat still transitioning between forms. Better than most would have. Lyra startled slightly, not having expected the elder wolf to be capable of speech in its current state. "You're awake," she said, recovering quickly. "How are you feeling?" "Weak," the wolf admitted, "but alive, thanks to you, and this fire you have not let die." Its intelligent eyes studied her carefully. "You do not know who we are, do you?" "No," Lyra admitted. "I don't." The elder wolf's gaze softened slightly, an expression that seemed almost sorrowful. "Perhaps that is for the best. For now. But know this, child. What you have done tonight will not go unnoticed, and what comes with morning will change everything you believe about the life you thought you had lost." Before Lyra could ask what that meant, exhaustion finally claimed the elder wolf fully, its eyes sliding shut once more, leaving her alone with those cryptic words hanging heavy in the firelit silence of her small, crowded cabin. Outside, the first pale hints of dawn had begun creeping over the eastern ridge, painting the snow in soft shades of gray and gold. Lyra rose stiffly, moving to the small window near her front door, watching the horizon lighten with a strange mixture of anticipation and dread settling in her stomach. Whatever the elder wolf's words meant, she would not have to wait long to find out. Something was coming with the dawn. She could feel it in the stillness of the forest beyond her cabin, in the tension that seemed to hum through the very air itself, despite the peaceful appearance of the breaking morning light. Behind her, 20 wolves and the handful who had shifted back into human form slept fitfully, unaware that the sanctuary Lyra had offered them through the night was about to be tested in ways none of them could have predicted. Lyra wrapped her blanket tighter around her shoulders, took a steadying breath, and waited. The light outside grew steadily stronger, chasing away the last shadows of night, and with it came a sound that made every wolf in the cabin lift their heads at once. It was faint at first, barely more than a vibration carried on the wind, but it grew clearer with each passing second. The rhythmic sound of many paws moving swiftly through snow, approaching from the direction of the eastern ridge. Lyra's pulse quickened. She moved to the window again, peering out through the frost-covered glass, trying to make sense of the shapes beginning to emerge from between the distant trees. Behind her, Nolan struggled to his feet despite his injuries, his face tightening with alarm the moment he registered the sound. "They found us," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, though there was no mistaking the fear threading through it. "Who found us?" Lyra asked, turning to face him. "Nolan, you need to tell me what's happening. Who is out there?" But before he could answer, the elder wolf, still lying near the fire, lifted its head with sudden clarity in its eyes. "It is not a threat," it said, its voice steadier now than it had been hours before. "Not the kind you fear, at least." Elowen, who had shifted back to human form sometime during the final hours of the night, moved closer to the window beside Lyra, peering out with cautious hope beginning to replace the exhaustion on her face. "It could be them," she murmured. "It could really be them." "Them who?" Lyra pressed, growing increasingly desperate to understand what was unfolding around her. Before anyone could answer, the shapes at the tree line resolved into clarity, and Lyra's breath caught in her throat. Dozens of wolves, healthy and strong, unlike the starved creatures who had collapsed on her porch through the night, emerged from the forest in organized formation. At their head walked a single figure in human form, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to command. Even from a distance, through the frosted glass, Lyra could feel the weight of his presence, a kind of gravity that seemed to pull the very air of the clearing toward him. She had grown up around alphas her entire life. She had lived beside one, loved one, been discarded by one only hours earlier. She recognized power when she felt it, and the power radiating from the approaching figure dwarfed anything she had ever encountered within Ashwood territory. "Is that?" she started to ask, but Nolan was already answering before she finished the question. "That is Alpha King Draven," he said, reverence and relief mixing in equal measure in his voice. "Ruler of the Silvermoon Kingdom. If he has come himself, it means he has been searching for us since we scattered." Lyra's mind raced to process the title. An Alpha King was a rank far beyond a simple pack alpha like Cade. It denoted rule over multiple territories, multiple packs bound together under a single crown, a position of power that very few wolves in her lifetime had ever witnessed firsthand. The Silvermoon Kingdom, she vaguely recalled from stories told during her childhood, lay far to the north, separated from Ashwood territory by mountains and rivers that few travelers ever crossed. If these wolves had truly come from Silvermoon, they had traveled an almost impossible distance to end up collapsed on her porch. The approaching group slowed as they reached the edge of the clearing surrounding Lyra's cabin, and the wolves accompanying Draven fanned out cautiously, clearly on alert despite the evident relief among the survivors inside. Draven himself continued forward alone, his pace unhurried but purposeful, his eyes fixed on the small cabin ahead, as though he could already sense exactly who and what he would find within its walls. Lyra stepped back from the window instinctively, her heart pounding with a complicated mixture of fear and curiosity. She had already lost everything the night before. She was not certain what she had left to lose, to a king she had never met, ruling a kingdom she barely knew existed. "Should we open the door?" she asked, glancing toward Nolan and Elowen, both of whom were already moving toward it with an eagerness that suggested there was no real question to consider. "He will not hurt us," Elowen assured her, though something in her tone suggested she was reassuring herself just as much as Lyra. "He never has. Whatever happened to scatter us, he will have moved mountains to find every last one of us." The door opened before Lyra could respond further, and cold morning air rushed into the cabin, alongside the imposing figure who stepped through it. Up close, Alpha King Draven was even more striking than he had appeared from a distance. His dark hair was cropped close, his jaw sharp and set, and his eyes, a pale gray that seemed to shift like storm clouds, swept across the room with an intensity that made every wolf present, human or otherwise, straighten instinctively under his gaze. But when those eyes landed on the collection of wounded, exhausted survivors scattered across Lyra's small cabin floor, something in his expression cracked open, just slightly, revealing an emotion far more human than the commanding presence he carried might have suggested. Relief, raw and overwhelming, passed across his features before he could fully mask it. "You are alive," he said quietly, his voice carrying easily to every corner of the small room, despite its softness. "All of you." A chorus of quiet, relieved responses rose from the survivors, some struggling to their feet despite their injuries, others simply reaching toward him from where they lay, as though needing physical confirmation that their rescue had truly arrived. Draven moved among them methodically, checking on each survivor personally, exchanging quiet words, offering reassurance that reinforcements and proper medical care were already on their way from a nearby outpost his people had established during the search. It was clear, watching him work through the room, that this was not a king who ruled from a distance, disconnected from the well-being of his people. Every wound he examined, every quiet exchange he shared, carried genuine concern that could not be faked or performed for an audience. It was only after he had checked on every survivor scattered throughout the cabin that his attention finally turned toward Lyra, who had remained standing quietly near the fireplace, uncertain of her place, amid the emotional reunion unfolding around her. Draven's gray eyes studied her for a long moment, taking in her exhausted posture, the dark circles beneath her eyes, the torn and dirtied remains of what had clearly once been a formal dress, entirely unsuited for the harsh conditions of the previous night. "You are the one who sheltered them," he said. It was not quite a question. "I am," Lyra confirmed, straightening despite her exhaustion. "I did not know who they were. I only knew they needed help, and I could offer it." Something shifted in Draven's expression at her answer, an intensity entering his gaze that made Lyra feel, for the first time since the wolves had begun arriving hours earlier, distinctly examined, as though he were seeing something within her that she herself could not perceive. 20 wolves, he said slowly, starved, wounded, strangers to you, appearing at your door in the middle of a winter storm, and you opened it, again and again, 20 separate times, knowing nothing of who they were, or what danger might have followed them. "I could not turn them away," Lyra said simply. "Not after everything." "After everything," Draven repeated, his eyes flickering briefly toward her torn dress, an observation that suggested he had already noticed more about her circumstances than she had explained aloud. "You were rejected, last night, before we found you." Lyra's chest tightened at the reminder, but she held his gaze steadily, despite the fresh wave of humiliation threatening to surface. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because," Draven said quietly, his gray eyes never leaving hers, "the scent of a broken bond lingers, even beneath exhaustion and cold, and because what you did last night, opening your home to strangers on the very night your own world fell apart around you, is not something ordinary people are capable of doing." The room had gone quiet around them, the surviving wolves and their rescuers alike sensing the significance of the exchange unfolding, though none of them fully understood yet what it truly meant. Draven took a slow step closer, close enough now that Lyra had to tilt her head slightly to maintain eye contact with him. "There is something you should know," he said, his voice dropping lower, carrying a weight that suggested the words about to follow would change far more than the immediate circumstances of the morning. "These wolves did not simply stumble upon your cabin by chance last night." Lyra's stomach tightened with a sense of foreboding. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Draven said, "that nothing about last night was coincidence. Not the storm, not the scattering of my people, and certainly not the fact that, out of every possible direction they might have fled, every one of them found their way specifically to you." Outside, the wind had finally calmed, the storm from the previous night having fully passed, leaving behind a crisp, clear morning, entirely at odds with the storm of questions now brewing inside Lyra's small cabin. She had thought, standing rejected in the snow only hours earlier, that her life had already reached its lowest and most confusing point. She was quickly beginning to understand that she had been entirely mistaken. Draven's words hung in the air of the small cabin, and for a long moment, no one spoke. Lyra felt the weight of every gaze in the room settle on her, the survivors watching with a strange mixture of curiosity and something that looked almost like recognition, as though they understood something about her that she herself did not yet grasp.
"I don't understand," Lyra finally said, breaking the silence.
"You're saying they came here on purpose? How is that possible? None of them knew me. I did not know any of them existed until they collapsed on my porch." Draven studied her for a moment before answering, choosing his words with obvious care. "Not on purpose in the way you mean. None of them knew your name or the location of your cabin when they fled, but something drew them here nonetheless, something older and less easily explained than simple chance. You speak of the old bloodlines," the elder silver-furred wolf said from its place near the fire, its voice steadier now, though still weak with exhaustion. It had shifted into human form at some point, while Lyra's attention had been fixed on Draven, revealing an older woman with silver hair that matched the coloring of her wolf form, her face lined with age but her eyes sharp and knowing. "Forgive me for not introducing myself sooner, child. My name is Marin. I served as advisor to King Draven's father before him, and to Draven himself since he claimed the throne." Lyra turned toward her, grateful for a familiar face amid the confusion, even one she had only just properly met. "Marin, thank you for trusting me last night." "It is I who should thank you," Marin said, offering a tired but genuine smile. "But to answer your question, there exists among certain wolf bloodlines an old and rare gift, one that has grown increasingly uncommon over the generations. Wolves who carry this gift emit something others of our kind can sense on some instinctual level, even without knowing what they are searching for. A kind of pull toward safety, toward shelter, toward someone capable of offering true sanctuary in a moment of desperate need." "You're saying I have this gift," Lyra said slowly, trying to make sense of the claim. "I am saying it is possible," Marin corrected gently. "The signs last night certainly suggest it. 20 wolves, scattered across miles of unfamiliar territory during a violent storm, somehow converging on a single isolated cabin, belonging to someone with no connection to Silvermoon whatsoever. That is not coincidence, child. That is instinct responding to something real." Lyra glanced toward Draven, searching his expression for confirmation or denial, but found only quiet consideration in his gray eyes as he listened to Marin's explanation. "Even if that's true," Lyra said, turning back to Marin, "what does it mean? What am I supposed to do with such a thing?" "That," Draven said before Marin could answer, "is a question we will need time to properly explore. But first, there are more urgent matters requiring attention. My people need care, warmth, and proper food, all of which are limited within this cabin. I have outriders bringing supplies from our nearest outpost, but it will take several hours for them to arrive." As if summoned by his words, the sound of additional wolves and horses could be heard approaching from the same direction Draven's initial search party had come from. Through the window, Lyra could see a larger group emerging from the tree line, this one clearly organized as a supply convoy, carrying blankets, medical supplies, and provisions loaded onto several sturdy pack horses. Draven moved quickly to organize the arriving assistance, directing his people with the easy authority of someone long accustomed to managing crisis situations. Within the hour, the 20 survivors who had spent the night in Lyra's small cabin were being properly examined by trained healers, wrapped in warm blankets far more substantial than the torn quilt strips Lyra had used through the night, and fed nourishing broth prepared over portable cooking fires set up just outside. Lyra found herself standing somewhat apart from the organized chaos, watching as the scene she had managed alone through the darkest hours of the night was transformed by trained hands and proper resources into something resembling an actual rescue operation. There was a strange, hollow feeling accompanying the relief she felt watching the survivors receive proper care, as though the adrenaline that had carried her through the night was finally beginning to drain away, leaving exhaustion and confusion in its place. "You should rest," a voice said beside her, and she turned to find Draven had approached without her noticing, his gray eyes studying her with an intensity that made her suddenly aware of how disheveled and exhausted she must appear. "I'm fine," she said automatically, though the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. "You have been awake through an entire night of crisis, immediately following what I imagine was one of the most painful experiences of your life," Draven said, his tone gentle despite its directness. "There is no shame in acknowledging exhaustion, Lyra." Hearing him say her name, which she did not recall telling him directly, caught her slightly off guard. "How do you know my name?" "Nolan mentioned it while explaining the night's events to my search commanders," Draven said. "I hope you don't mind." "I don't," Lyra said, though she found herself studying him more closely now, trying to understand this Alpha King who had appeared in her life so suddenly, carrying with him claims about ancient bloodlines and rare gifts that seemed to belong more to old stories than to the practical world she had always known. "May I ask you something?" Draven said after a moment of comfortable silence had settled between them. "Of course." "The Alpha who rejected you," he said carefully, watching her reaction closely as he spoke. "What was his name?" Lyra hesitated, the question stirring fresh pain despite everything else that had happened since the rejection occurred. Cade, she finally said. Alpha of the Ashwood Pack. Something flickered across Draven's face at the name, an expression Lyra could not quite identify, gone too quickly for her to properly analyze it. Ashwood, he repeated quietly, more to himself than to her. That territory borders the disputed lands to the south, does it not? It does, Lyra confirmed, growing curious about the direction of his questions. Why do you ask? Draven's expression grew more serious, the easy warmth from moments earlier giving way to something more calculated, more careful. Because, he said slowly, the disputed lands to the south are precisely where my people were attacked before they scattered. And because Ashwood's recent alliance with a particular southern faction has not gone unnoticed by my advisors. Lyra felt a chill settle over her that had nothing to do with the cold morning air. Are you suggesting Cade is somehow connected to what happened to your people? I am suggesting, Draven said carefully, that very little about the past few days has felt like coincidence to me. Your rejection, the timing of the attack on my people, their scattering directly toward your specific location. These threads are beginning to weave together into a pattern I do not yet fully understand, but which I intend to investigate thoroughly. Before Lyra could respond, Marin approached, having overheard at least part of their conversation. Her expression was grave, the earlier warmth replaced by something more urgent. My king, she said, there is something you need to see. One of the younger wolves, Finn, recovered enough to speak with your commanders. What he described matches a pattern we have seen before. Draven's jaw tightened, the full weight of his authority settling back over him, like a mantle being reclaimed. Show me, he said, then turned briefly back toward Lyra. This conversation is not finished, but I must attend to my people first. Lyra nodded, watching as he followed Marin toward the medical tents that had been quickly assembled outside her cabin, leaving her alone once more with her spinning thoughts, and a growing sense that whatever had begun the previous night was far from over. She wrapped her arms around herself against the cold, staring out at the organized activity now filling the clearing around her once quiet home, and wondered exactly what kind of storm she had truly walked into when she opened her door to the very first starving wolf collapsed on her porch. Nearly an hour passed before Draven returned, and when he did, his expression carried a heaviness that had not been present before. He found Lyra sitting on the porch steps of her cabin, a cup of warm broth someone had thoughtfully brought her cradled between her hands, though she had barely touched it. Finn's account was troubling, Draven said, settling onto the step beside her without waiting for an invitation, a familiarity that might have felt presumptuous from anyone else, but somehow did not from him. He described armed wolves, wearing no visible pack markings, attacking our eastern settlement without warning or provocation. They moved with coordination that suggested extensive planning, not a spontaneous territorial dispute. Do you know who was responsible? Lyra asked. Not yet with certainty, Draven admitted, but the timing troubles me greatly. My kingdom has maintained peaceful relations with every neighboring territory for over a decade. There has been no recent conflict significant enough to explain an attack of this scale and coordination. Lyra turned the cup slowly in her hands, considering his words. You mentioned Ashwood's alliance with a southern faction earlier. Do you think that connects somehow? I think, Draven said carefully, that it would be foolish to ignore the possibility. Ashwood sits along a critical trade route between my kingdom and the southern territories. If someone wished to weaken my kingdom's influence in that region, disrupting the alliance between Ashwood and Silvermoon, an alliance that has existed peacefully for generations under previous leadership, would serve that purpose effectively. Cade only recently took over full leadership of Ashwood, Lyra said slowly, memories of pack politics she had witnessed over the past year surfacing with new significance. His father stepped down due to illness, less than a year ago. Cade has been eager to prove himself as a strong, independent leader, sometimes making decisions his father's advisors considered rash. Draven's gray eyes sharpened with interest. Rash decisions, such as rejecting a mate publicly without apparent cause? Lyra's chest tightened at the direct reference to her humiliation, but she forced herself to consider the question honestly, rather than emotionally. I don't know why he rejected me, she admitted quietly. He gave no explanation. He simply stood before the entire pack and spoke the words. I have spent all night trying to understand what I might have done wrong, but I keep returning to the same conclusion. I don't believe I did anything at all. I don't believe you did either, Draven said, his voice softening slightly. Rejections of that nature, sudden and unexplained, after what I understand was previously a stable bond, often indicate outside influence rather than genuine personal conflict between mates. Outside influence, Lyra repeated. You think someone convinced Cade to reject me? I think it is possible, Draven said. And if my suspicion proves correct, it would mean your rejection was never truly about you at all, but rather a calculated move by someone seeking to weaken Ashwood's leadership, or perhaps to isolate you, specifically for reasons not yet clear to either of us. The suggestion sent a fresh wave of confusion through Lyra's already overwhelmed mind. She had spent the entire night believing her rejection stemmed from some personal failure, some flaw within herself that had driven Cade away. The possibility that it might instead have been orchestrated by an outside party, for reasons entirely unrelated to her own worth or actions, was almost harder to process than the rejection itself had been. Why would anyone go to such lengths to isolate me? She asked. I hold no special position within Ashwood, beyond being an Omega. I have no political influence, no significant resources, nothing that would make me a target worth such elaborate scheming. Draven studied her for a long moment before responding, his expression unreadable. That, he said finally, is precisely the question Marin and I intend to investigate further, but I suspect the answer may relate to the very gift she described to you earlier. Rare bloodlines and rare gifts have historically attracted both those who wish to protect them and those who wish to exploit them for their own purposes. A chill ran through Lyra that had nothing to do with the winter air still lingering despite the clearing morning. You think someone knows about this gift, whatever it truly is, and wanted me isolated because of it? I think it is a possibility worth taking seriously, Draven said. Though I want to be clear that this remains speculation at this stage. We do not yet have enough information to draw firm conclusions. They sat in silence for a while after that, the organized activity of Draven's people continuing around them as the survivors received proper care and preparations began for their eventual journey back toward Silvermoon territory. Lyra found herself studying Draven's profile as he watched over his people, noting the way his expression softened whenever he checked in on one of the survivors, the genuine warmth he displayed, despite the serious burdens of leadership clearly weighing on him. He was nothing like she had expected an Alpha King to be, based on the stories and legends she had grown up hearing. Those stories had painted such figures as distant, cold, more concerned with power and territory than with the well-being of individual pack members. Draven, by contrast, had personally checked on every single survivor, had knelt beside the weakest among them to offer comfort, had shown more genuine concern for Lyra's exhaustion in their brief conversation than Cade had shown for her well-being during the final weeks of their supposed bond. May I ask you something now? Lyra said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. Of course, Draven replied, turning his attention fully back toward her. Why does this matter so much to you personally? She asked. You are a king ruling an entire kingdom. Surely you have advisors and commanders capable of managing a search and rescue operation without your direct involvement. Yet here you are, personally checking on every survivor, personally investigating the circumstances of an attack, personally sitting on my porch steps discussing theories about ancient bloodlines with someone you met only hours ago. Draven's expression grew thoughtful, and for a moment, Lyra wondered if she had overstepped some boundary by asking such a direct question of a king. But when he finally answered, his voice carried none of the offense she had feared. Because, he said slowly, I have learned through hard experience that leadership disconnected from the individual well-being of those you are meant to protect is not truly leadership at all. It is merely rule, and rule without genuine care eventually crumbles from within, regardless of how strong it might appear from the outside. He paused, his gray eyes meeting hers with unexpected intensity. My father believed differently. He ruled from a distance, trusting his advisors to handle matters he considered beneath his direct attention. It cost him greatly in the final years of his reign, in ways I do not wish to repeat. I'm sorry, Lyra said softly, sensing there was significant pain hidden within his careful words. It was a long time ago, Draven said, though his tone suggested the wound remained fresher than he perhaps wished to admit. But it taught me the importance of remaining present, of understanding my people, not merely as subjects to be governed, but as individuals whose well-being directly determines the strength and stability of everything I am meant to protect. Lyra found herself nodding slowly, understanding settling over her in a way that made her see this powerful stranger in an entirely different light. That's a rare quality in someone with as much power as you hold. Perhaps, Draven said, a faint smile touching his lips for the first time since their conversation had begun. Or perhaps it is simply the only kind of leadership I know how to offer, having learned firsthand the cost of its absence. Before their conversation could continue further, one of Draven's commanders approached, requesting his attention regarding logistics for the survivors' transport back to Silvermoon territory. Draven rose, offering Lyra a brief but genuine smile, before turning to address the matter, leaving her once again alone, with her thoughts on the porch steps of the small cabin that had, in less than a single day, become the center of events far larger and more complicated than she could have ever anticipated. She watched him move among his people, commanding and comforting in equal measure, and found herself wondering, with a curiosity she had not expected to feel so soon after her painful rejection, what exactly the coming days would reveal about the tangled threads connecting her rejection, the attack on Silvermoon's people, and whatever rare gift apparently ran through her own blood. The morning sun had fully risen now, casting warm golden light across the snow-covered clearing, and for the first time since Cade's rejection had shattered her world the previous night, Lyra felt something other than grief and confusion beginning to take root within her chest. She felt, however faintly, the stirring of hope. The days that followed brought a strange new rhythm to Lyra's life, one she could never have predicted when she woke that first morning to find her small cabin surrounded by Silvermoon's rescue party. Draven had insisted, despite her initial protests, that she accompany the survivors back toward the nearest Silvermoon outpost, a fortified settlement roughly a day's travel north of her cabin, where proper facilities existed for the wounded to recover fully, and where his investigators could work more effectively to uncover the truth behind the attack. She had resisted at first, uncertain about leaving the only home still legally hers to follow a king and his people into unfamiliar territory, but the practical reality of her situation had become impossible to ignore. Ashwood no longer welcomed her. Her cabin, while precious to her, offered no long-term security, no community, no path forward beyond simple survival in increasing isolation. When Marin had gently pointed out that remaining alone in a remote cabin, especially given the unresolved questions surrounding her possible connection to whatever conspiracy had targeted Silvermoon's people, carried real risks Lyra might not be equipped to handle alone, she had finally agreed to travel with them. The outpost, when they arrived, proved larger and more impressive than Lyra had expected. Sturdy wooden buildings surrounded a central square, smoke rising from numerous chimneys, the sounds of a functioning community filling the crisp winter air. Word of the successful rescue had apparently traveled ahead of their arrival, and the survivors were greeted with genuine relief and celebration by the outpost's residents, many of whom had clearly feared the worst during the days their loved ones had remained missing. Lyra found herself somewhat overwhelmed by the attention that quickly turned toward her as word spread of her role in sheltering the survivors through that first desperate night. Residents she had never met approached to offer thanks, some pressing small gifts into her hands, despite her protests, that she had simply done what anyone would do in her position. She was not accustomed to such open gratitude, having spent the majority of her time within Ashwood feeling increasingly invisible, as Cade's attention had drifted elsewhere in the months before his rejection. "You seem uncomfortable with the attention," Draven observed one evening, finding her sitting alone on a bench overlooking the outpost's central square, watching the community's evening activities from a comfortable distance, rather than participating directly. "I'm not used to it," Lyra admitted honestly. "Within Ashwood, I learned to make myself smaller, less noticeable, particularly during the final months before the rejection. It feels strange now to have people actively seeking me out, rather than looking past me." Draven settled onto the bench beside her, his presence carrying the same easy familiarity it had held since their first conversation on her cabin's porch steps. "You should not have had to make yourself smaller anywhere," he said, a note of quiet anger threading through his otherwise calm tone. "Whatever failures existed within that bond, they were not failures of your own making." "You keep saying that," Lyra said, glancing sideways at him. "How can you be so certain?" "Because I have spent the past several days investigating exactly that question," Draven said. "And what my investigators have uncovered only strengthens my suspicion that your rejection was orchestrated, rather than genuine." Lyra straightened, her full attention now focused on him. "What have you found?" Draven hesitated briefly before answering, as though weighing how much to share. "There is evidence suggesting a member of Ashwood's council maintained secret communication with representatives from the southern faction responsible for the attack on my people. The timing of these communications aligns closely with the shift in Cade's behavior toward you that you mentioned occurring in the weeks before his rejection. You believe someone within Cade's own council manipulated him into rejecting me," Lyra said slowly, processing the implications. "I believe it is highly likely," Draven confirmed, "though we have not yet confirmed the specific method used, whether through direct deception, manufactured evidence against you, or something else entirely. My investigators continue working to uncover the full details." Lyra sat with this information for a long moment, feelings of anger beginning to mix with the grief she had carried since the rejection. If someone had truly manipulated Cade into discarding her, using her as a pawn in some larger political scheme she barely understood, the injustice of it burned deeper than the rejection itself ever had. "Why me specifically?" she finally asked. "Even if someone manipulated Cade for political reasons, why target me rather than simply working through Cade directly, without involving me at all?" "That question troubles me as well," Draven admitted. "Marin believes it connects to your bloodline, to the gift she suspects you carry. If whoever orchestrated this scheme somehow discovered your potential connection to that ancient gift, isolating you from Ashwood's protection, while simultaneously creating circumstances that would draw my scattered people directly toward you, would serve a particular purpose." "What purpose?" Lyra pressed. Draven's expression grew grave. "Testing you, perhaps, or worse, attempting to draw you into a position where you might be more easily controlled or exploited once your gift became undeniable. An isolated Omega, rejected and vulnerable, discovering unexpected power with no established pack or ally to protect her, would present an appealing target to anyone seeking to exploit rare gifts for their own purposes." The implications settled over Lyra like a physical weight. She had spent the days since her rejection focused primarily on immediate survival and the overwhelming events unfolding around her, without fully considering that she might currently exist as a target for forces far more dangerous than the simple heartbreak of a broken bond. "Am I in danger?" she asked directly, needing a clear answer rather than careful diplomatic language. Draven met her gaze steadily. "I believe it is possible," he said honestly. "Which is part of why I insisted you travel with us to this outpost, rather than remain alone at your cabin. Here, surrounded by my people and under direct protection, you are considerably safer than you would be isolated in remote territory, with unclear allegiances surrounding you." Lyra absorbed this information, gratitude mixing with a lingering discomfort at needing protection at all, at having her circumstances shift so dramatically from independent Omega within a stable pack to potential target requiring a king's direct intervention for her safety. "Thank you," she said finally, "for taking this seriously, for investigating, rather than simply dismissing my rejection as an unfortunate but unremarkable personal matter. You saved 20 of my people through your own courage and compassion," Draven said, his voice carrying quiet conviction. "The very least I owe you in return is thorough investigation into the circumstances that led you to be standing alone in the snow the night we needed you most." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while longer, watching the outpost's evening activities continue around them, before Draven eventually rose to attend to additional duties requiring his attention. But his parting words lingered with Lyra long after he had gone. "There is something else," he said, pausing before leaving. "Marin wishes to properly test whether the gift she suspects exists within you is genuine. She believes she has developed a method that might provide clearer answers, if you are willing to participate." "What would that involve?" Lyra asked, curiosity and apprehension mixing within her. "I do not fully understand the specifics myself," Draven admitted. "Marin guards knowledge of the old bloodlines carefully, sharing details only when she deems it necessary. But she assures me the process carries no danger to you, merely requiring patience and openness on your part." Lyra considered this for a long moment before nodding. "I'm willing to try, if it might help us understand what's truly happening." "Then I will arrange for Marin to speak with you tomorrow," Draven said, offering her a small, genuine smile before finally taking his leave. Left alone once more on the bench overlooking the outpost's evening activities, Lyra found her thoughts spinning through everything she had learned in the days since her rejection. The possibility that her entire painful humiliation had been orchestrated rather than genuine, that she might carry some rare and ancient gift within her blood, that she might currently exist as a target for forces seeking to exploit that gift for their own purposes, all of it felt overwhelming to process fully. And yet, beneath the confusion and apprehension, she recognized something else, stirring within her as well, something she had not expected to feel, so soon after her world had shattered so completely. A sense of possibility, of purpose beginning to emerge from the wreckage of her old life, carried forward by a king who had shown her more genuine care and respect in a handful of days than she had received from her former mate in the final months of their entire bond. Whatever awaited her in the coming days, whatever truths Marin's testing might reveal, Lyra found herself facing it with something other than despair. She found herself facing it, however cautiously, with hope. Marin found Lyra early the next morning, waiting outside the small guest quarters that had been arranged for her within the outpost. The elder woman's silver hair caught the pale morning light as she approached, her expression carrying the same calm authority Lyra had noticed even during Marin's weakest moments in wolf form back at the cabin. "Are you ready?" Marin asked, studying Lyra's face carefully, as though gauging her genuine readiness, rather than simply accepting a verbal confirmation. "I think so," Lyra admitted, "though I'll confess, I don't fully understand what to expect." "Few do, the first time," Marin said, a faint smile touching her lips. "Come, walk with me. It is easier to explain while moving than standing still." They made their way through the outpost's quiet morning streets, most residents still beginning their daily routines, smoke curling from chimneys as breakfast fires were lit throughout the community. Marin led them toward the edge of the settlement, where a small grove of ancient trees stood separate from the main cluster of buildings, their bare winter branches creating intricate patterns against the pale sky above. "This grove has stood since long before Silvermoon Kingdom existed in its current form," Marin explained as they walked beneath the trees. "The wolves who first settled this land recognized something significant about this particular place, something connected to the old bloodlines and their gifts." "What kind of significance?" Lyra asked, looking around at the seemingly ordinary trees with newfound curiosity. "Places where the old magic runs closest to the surface," Marin said, "where those who carry rare gifts within their blood often find those gifts easier to recognize and understand, if the gifts are genuinely present." They stopped in a small clearing at the grove's center, where a flat stone, clearly ancient and worn smooth by countless years of exposure to the elements, sat surrounded by the circle of trees. Marin gestured for Lyra to sit upon it, which she did somewhat hesitantly. "What happens now?" Lyra asked. "Now," Marin said, settling onto the ground before her, with surprising grace for someone of her apparent age. "You simply need to be open and honest with yourself about what you feel. The old gifts do not respond well to forced effort or performance. They respond to authenticity." "I'm not sure I understand what I'm supposed to do," Lyra admitted. Marin's expression softened with patience. "Think back to last night, to the moment the first wolf arrived at your door. Do you remember what you felt in that instant, before conscious thought had time to intervene?" Lyra closed her eyes, allowing her mind to drift back to that pivotal moment. She remembered the scratching sound, her initial confusion, and then the moment she had opened the door to find the starving wolf collapsed on her porch. She remembered the immediate, overwhelming wave of concern that had washed through her, a feeling so strong it had completely overridden any thought of her own safety, or the practical risks of allowing a strange, injured wolf into her home. "I felt," she said slowly, trying to articulate the sensation accurately, "an urgent need to help. Not just sympathy, but something deeper, almost like recognizing pain I needed to address immediately, regardless of the cost to myself." "That is the beginning," Marin said quietly. "Now focus on that feeling. Let it grow rather than pushing it away, or trying to control it with logical thought." Lyra kept her eyes closed, allowing the memory of that overwhelming empathetic pull to expand within her mind. As she focused on it, something strange began to happen. The feeling did not remain merely a memory, but seemed to take on a physical quality, a warmth spreading from her chest outward through her limbs, growing steadily stronger the more she allowed herself to sink into the sensation. "Something is happening," she said, her voice carrying a mixture of wonder and slight apprehension. Do not fight it, Marin instructed gently. Simply observe and allow it to continue. The warmth continued spreading, and Lyra became aware of something else alongside it, a subtle awareness extending beyond her own physical body, as though her senses had somehow expanded to perceive things beyond normal range. She could sense, faintly but unmistakably, the presence of every living creature within the grove around her, from small birds nestled in the bare branches above, to insects sheltering beneath the frozen ground, each presence carrying its own subtle emotional signature that she found herself somehow able to perceive. I can feel them, she said, her eyes still closed, wonder coloring her voice. All of them. Every living thing in this grove. Yes, Marin confirmed, satisfaction evident in her tone. That is the beginning of the gift fully awakening within you. What you experienced last night, drawing my king's scattered people toward your specific location, was your gift responding instinctively to widespread distress, even before you consciously understood what was happening. Lyra opened her eyes slowly, the expanded awareness gradually settling back into something more manageable as she returned her focus to her immediate physical surroundings. What exactly is this gift? She asked. What does it mean for me? Marin considered the question carefully before answering. The old texts call it the sanctuary gift, she explained. Those who carry it possess an innate ability to sense suffering across significant distances, and equally significant, possess an instinctive pull that draws suffering creatures toward them, toward whatever safety and comfort they are capable of providing. It is exceedingly rare, appearing perhaps once in several generations across the entirety of the wolf kingdoms. Why would such a gift make me a target for whoever manipulated my rejection? Lyra asked, connecting Marin's explanation back to Draven's earlier concerns. Because, Marin said, her expression growing more serious, throughout history, those who carry the sanctuary gift have proven invaluable during times of conflict and crisis. A leader with access to someone carrying this gift gains significant advantages, whether through legitimate alliance and cooperation, or through darker means of coercion and exploitation. The implications settled heavily over Lyra. You think whoever orchestrated my rejection wanted to isolate me specifically because they suspected I carried this gift, hoping to exploit it once I had no pack or ally to protect me. It is the most logical explanation for the pattern of events we have observed, Marin confirmed, though we still lack definitive proof of who exactly orchestrated this scheme, or their ultimate purpose in doing so. Lyra sat in silence for a long moment, processing everything Marin had shared. The revelation that she carried such a rare and significant gift felt overwhelming, particularly following so closely after the devastating rejection that had already upended her entire understanding of her place within the world. What happens now? She finally asked. Now that we know the gift is genuine, what does that mean for my future? Marin's expression grew thoughtful. That, child, is a question only you can ultimately answer. The gift itself carries no predetermined destiny. It simply represents potential, a capacity for compassion and connection that you already demonstrated clearly through your own choices, even before understanding its full nature. What you choose to do with that potential moving forward remains entirely your decision. They remained in the quiet grove for a while longer, Marin patiently answering additional questions as Lyra worked to process everything she had learned. By the time they finally made their way back toward the main settlement, the morning had fully given way to midday, and Lyra found herself viewing the world around her with a subtly shifted perspective, aware now of an entire dimension of her own nature she had never previously understood existed. Draven met them as they returned to the outpost's central square, his expression carrying obvious curiosity about the results of Marin's testing. Well, he asked, looking between the two women. The gift is genuine, Marin confirmed. Fully present, and, I suspect, considerably more powerful than we initially anticipated, given how quickly it responded during last night's crisis, and how readily it awakened this morning, despite her having no prior training or awareness of its existence. Something shifted in Draven's expression at this confirmation, a complicated mixture of validation and concern crossing his features. Then we must move quickly to ensure her safety, he said, particularly if our suspicions about the motivations behind her rejection prove accurate. What did you have in mind? Lyra asked, uncertain what additional protection beyond her current stay at the outpost he might be considering. Draven's gray eyes met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch slightly. "I would like to offer you a place within Silvermoon Kingdom directly," he said, "under my personal protection, for as long as you require it. Not as a temporary guest, but as someone genuinely welcomed within my kingdom's community." The offer, generous and unexpected, left Lyra momentarily speechless. She had spent the days since her rejection uncertain about her future, uncertain where she truly belonged now that Ashwood no longer welcomed her. The possibility of a genuine place within Silvermoon Kingdom, offered not out of obligation, but out of what appeared to be authentic care for her well-being, felt like more than she had dared hope for since that devastating night in the snow. "I don't know what to say," she admitted honestly. "You need not decide immediately," Draven said gently. "Take whatever time you need to consider the offer fully. My kingdom will remain open to you regardless, whatever ultimate decision you reach about your future." Lyra nodded slowly, gratitude and uncertainty mixing within her as she considered the unexpected path her life had taken since that painful rejection just days earlier. Whatever she ultimately decided, she recognized that the woman standing in this outpost square, having just discovered a rare and powerful gift within her own blood, bore little resemblance to the humiliated Omega, who had walked alone through the snow toward an isolated cabin only a handful of days before. She had lost everything that night, but in losing it, she had somehow begun discovering something else entirely, something she had never known existed within herself. Whatever came next, she intended to face it fully, carrying forward the strength she had discovered within herself during that long, difficult night when 20 desperate strangers had found their way to her door. The days following Marin's confirmation of Lyra's gift brought a flurry of activity to the outpost, as Draven's investigators worked to piece together the full picture of what had led to both the attack on Silvermoon's eastern settlement and Lyra's sudden, unexplained rejection. Lyra found herself included in these discussions more frequently than she had expected, her perspective on Ashwood's internal politics proving valuable to investigators unfamiliar with the pack's specific dynamics. It was during one such discussion, held in a modest meeting room within the outpost's central hall, that the final pieces of the conspiracy began falling into place. Commander Rowan, a stern-faced wolf who led Draven's investigative efforts, spread a collection of intercepted correspondence across the table before them. "We finally managed to trace the communications back to their source," Rowan explained, his voice carrying grim satisfaction at having cracked the puzzle. "A council member within Ashwood named Edric maintained regular contact with representatives from the southern faction, responsible for attacking our eastern settlement." Lyra leaned forward, studying the documents despite not fully recognizing the coded language used throughout. "Edric," she repeated, memory stirring as she connected the name to a face. "He served as one of Cade's senior advisors. I never trusted him fully, though I could never articulate exactly why." "Your instincts were correct," Rowan said. "According to what we've uncovered, Edric had been secretly working to weaken Ashwood's alliance with Silvermoon for nearly a year, motivated by promises of significant power and territory from the southern faction, should their broader plans succeed." "What plans?" Draven asked, his expression grave as he studied the spread documents. "A coordinated effort to destabilize the northern kingdoms," Rowan explained, "beginning with weakening the alliance between Ashwood and Silvermoon, then using the resulting chaos to justify further incursions into disputed territories. The attack on our eastern settlement served two purposes within this scheme. It weakened Silvermoon directly, while also creating the scattered survivors whose eventual arrival would test whether the old rumors about a sanctuary gift existing within Ashwood's territory held any truth." Lyra's stomach tightened at this confirmation of Draven's earlier suspicions. "So my rejection truly was orchestrated to isolate me, specifically to test this theory." "It appears so," Rowan confirmed, his expression carrying evident sympathy despite the clinical nature of his explanation. "Edric apparently discovered old records suggesting your grandmother's bloodline carried the potential for the sanctuary gift, information that had otherwise been largely forgotten given how many generations had passed since it last manifested clearly within your family line." "How did he convince Cade to actually go through with the rejection?" Lyra asked, still struggling to understand how her former mate had been manipulated into such a devastating public act. Rowan's expression grew slightly uncomfortable. "The correspondence suggests Edric fabricated evidence of infidelity on your part, presenting Cade with falsified accounts, and even manufactured physical evidence, suggesting you had been unfaithful during a period when Cade's own duties had kept him frequently away from the pack's main territory. The revelation hit Lyra like a physical blow. She had spent days wondering what personal failure might have driven Cade to reject her so suddenly and publicly. Learning that the entire foundation of his decision rested on deliberate lies, carefully constructed to manipulate him into destroying their bond, brought a complicated wave of emotions crashing through her. Relief that she had genuinely done nothing wrong, mixed uncomfortably with fresh anger at having been used so callously as a pawn in a scheme she had known nothing about. "Does Cade know the truth now?" she asked quietly. "We have not yet made direct contact with Ashwood regarding these findings," Rowan said. Given the sensitivity of the information and the ongoing investigation, King Draven felt it wise to gather complete evidence before approaching Ashwood's leadership directly. Draven, who had remained largely silent during Rowan's explanation, finally spoke, his voice carrying carefully controlled anger. "I intend to travel to Ashwood personally within the coming days," he said, "to present this evidence directly to Cade and demand accountability for Edric's actions, both regarding the attack on my people and the manipulation used against Lyra." "I would like to accompany you," Lyra said immediately, surprising herself slightly with the firmness of her own conviction. Draven turned toward her, studying her expression carefully. "Are you certain? Facing Cade again, particularly under these circumstances, may prove emotionally difficult." "I'm certain," Lyra said, and she found, examining her own feelings honestly, that she genuinely was. "I deserve to hear the truth acknowledged directly, and Cade deserves to understand the full extent of how he was manipulated, if there remains any hope of him recognizing his own error clearly." Draven considered her request for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Very well. You shall accompany us, if that is truly what you wish." The journey to Ashwood territory began 3 days later, once Draven's investigators had finished compiling their complete evidence, and a formal delegation had been organized for the diplomatic confrontation ahead. Lyra rode alongside Draven and Marin, the familiar landscape of her former home growing steadily closer with each passing hour, stirring complicated emotions she struggled to fully process. They arrived at Ashwood's territory boundary as afternoon light began slanting golden through the surrounding forest, and word of their approach clearly reached the pack's main settlement before they did, as a small welcoming party, led by Cade himself, met them at the boundary line. Cade's expression, upon recognizing Lyra riding alongside the Silvermoon delegation, shifted through visible confusion before settling into something resembling cautious wariness. "Alpha King Draven," he said, offering a formal bow of respect, despite his obvious uncertainty about the purpose of this unexpected visit. "This is an unexpected honor." "And Lyra," he added, his eyes flickering toward her with an expression she could not quite read, "I did not expect to see you again." "We have matters of significant importance to discuss," Draven said, his tone carrying diplomatic formality that nonetheless left no doubt about the seriousness of the visit's purpose. "Matters concerning both our kingdom's security and concerning the true circumstances surrounding Lyra's recent rejection from your pack." Cade's expression tightened slightly at this, though he maintained his composure. "Please, join us within the main hall where we can discuss such matters properly." The gathered delegation made their way toward Ashwood's central meeting hall, the familiar building stirring memories within Lyra that felt simultaneously distant and painfully immediate. She had stood within these very walls countless times during her years as Cade's mate, participating in pack discussions, sharing meals with the community she had once considered family. Once inside, with Ashwood's senior council members gathered alongside Cade, Draven wasted little time presenting the evidence Rowan's investigation had uncovered. He laid out the intercepted correspondence, the confirmed connection between Edric and the Southern faction, and the fabricated evidence used to manipulate Cade into rejecting Lyra without genuine cause. Lyra watched Cade's expression carefully as the truth unfolded before the assembled council. She saw confusion give way to disbelief, then to a dawning horror, as the full scope of Edric's manipulation became undeniably clear. His eyes moved repeatedly toward a council member seated near the back of the hall, an older wolf, with a carefully neutral expression that nonetheless carried a subtle tension betraying his growing alarm as the evidence continued mounting against him. "Edric," Cade finally said, his voice carrying barely controlled fury as he turned fully toward the man in question. "Is this true?" Did you fabricate evidence against Lyra? Did you manipulate me into rejecting my own mate based on lies? Edric's composure finally cracked under the weight of Cade's direct accusation, and the undeniable evidence spread before the entire council. I did what was necessary, he said, his voice defensive rather than apologetic, for the future security and advancement of this pack. Ashwood's alliance with Silvermoon was limiting our potential, keeping us subordinate to northern interests when far greater opportunities existed through southern partnership. You destroyed an innocent woman's life and reputation based on lies, Cade said, rising to his feet, his fury now fully unleashed. And you did so to serve your own ambitions for power, dressed up as concern for this pack's future. You attacked Silvermoon's people, causing them tremendous suffering, all to test some theory about a rare gift you suspected Lyra might carry. The council hall fell into stunned silence as the full weight of Edric's betrayal settled over the assembled members. Cade turned finally toward Lyra, his expression carrying genuine anguish as the reality of what he had done, however unknowingly, fully registered. Lyra, he said, his voice breaking slightly, I am so sorry. I should have questioned the evidence more carefully. I should have trusted the years of loyalty and love you demonstrated, rather than accepting fabricated claims so readily. I failed you completely, and no apology can undo the damage that failure caused. Lyra studied him for a long moment, feeling the weight of complicated emotions settling within her. Anger, at how easily he had believed such fabrications, without giving her the chance to defend herself. Sympathy, for how thoroughly he had been manipulated by someone he had trusted as a close advisor. And beneath both, a quiet recognition that the pain of that public rejection, however unjustly caused, had ultimately led her toward discoveries about herself and her own strength that she might never have found otherwise. I appreciate your acknowledgement of the truth, she said finally, choosing her words carefully. But Cade, even setting aside Edric's manipulation, our bond had already grown distant and troubled in the months before this happened. Perhaps this painful chapter, difficult as it has been, has revealed truths about our compatibility that needed to surface, regardless of Edric's interference. Cade's expression carried visible pain at her words, but also, Lyra noted, a flicker of understanding rather than argument. Perhaps you are right, he admitted quietly. I have much to reflect upon, regarding both Edric's betrayal and my own failures as your mate, long before that betrayal fully manifested. The confrontation concluded, with Edric being formally stripped of his council position and taken into custody, pending further investigation into the full scope of his crimes against both Ashwood and Silvermoon. As the assembled group began dispersing, Cade approached Lyra one final time, his expression carrying quiet resignation, rather than any lingering hope for reconciliation. I wish you genuine happiness, Lyra, he said, wherever your path leads from here. You deserved far better than what I allowed to happen, both through Edric's manipulation and through my own growing distance in the months before it. Thank you, Cade, Lyra said, and found, examining her own heart honestly, that she meant the acceptance genuinely, rather than out of mere politeness. I hope you find the wisdom to lead Ashwood well, learning from this experience, rather than being defined by it. As the Silvermoon delegation prepared for their return journey, Draven fell into step beside Lyra, his expression carrying quiet concern as he studied her carefully. How are you feeling? He asked gently. Lyra considered the question honestly before answering. Lighter, she said finally, somewhat surprised by her own answer. I came here fearing this confrontation would reopen wounds I had only just begun healing. Instead, I find myself feeling as though a chapter has genuinely closed, allowing me to move forward without the weight of unanswered questions still hanging over me. Draven's expression softened at her answer, something warm passing behind his gray eyes. I am glad, he said simply, and Lyra found herself believing the sincerity of those words completely. As they rode away from Ashwood territory, the familiar landscape of her former home fading behind them, Lyra found herself looking forward, rather than backward for the first time, since that devastating rejection in the snow. Whatever awaited her within Silvermoon Kingdom, whatever her rare gift might ultimately mean for her future, she found herself approaching it with a sense of genuine hope rather than mere survival. The chapter of her life connected to Ashwood and Cade had finally, truly closed. and ahead of her, carried forward on the strength of a king who had shown her more genuine respect and care in these recent difficult days than she had experienced in years within her former pack. An entirely new chapter waited to begin. The weeks following their return to Silvermoon Kingdom brought Lyra a sense of belonging she had not experienced in longer than she cared to admit. She settled into a comfortable residence within the kingdom's main settlement, a place considerably grander than her grandmother's small cabin, though she found herself returning to visit the cabin periodically, unwilling to fully sever her connection to the place that had witnessed the beginning of this unexpected transformation in her life. Marin continued working with her regularly, helping her understand and properly control the sanctuary gift, now fully awakened within her. Lyra learned to recognize the subtle pull of distant suffering without becoming overwhelmed by it, to offer genuine comfort and shelter without exhausting herself entirely, as she had during that first desperate night when 20 starving wolves had found their way to her door. She also found herself spending increasing amounts of time in Draven's company, their initial connection forged during crisis gradually deepening into something neither of them had explicitly named, though both seemed to recognize its presence nonetheless. He sought her counsel on matters both political and personal, valued her perspective in ways that felt genuinely respectful rather than merely performative, and consistently demonstrated the same careful, considerate nature she had first witnessed during that chaotic morning when he arrived at her cabin to find his scattered people safely sheltered within. It was during a quiet evening walk through the kingdom's central gardens, several weeks after their confrontation with Edric at Ashwood, that Draven finally addressed the growing connection between them directly. "I have been hesitant to speak of this," he began, his expression carrying uncharacteristic uncertainty as they walked together beneath the evening stars. "Given everything you have already experienced regarding matters of the heart in recent months, I did not wish to add pressure to a situation you might not be ready to consider." Lyra turned toward him, curious about the direction of his careful words. "What is it you wish to speak of?" Draven stopped walking, turning to face her fully, his gray eyes carrying an intensity that made her breath catch slightly. "I find myself drawn to you, Lyra, in ways that extend well beyond simple gratitude for what you did for my people that first night. I admire your courage, your compassion, the strength you have shown in rebuilding your sense of self, following such a devastating betrayal. I would like to explore what might exist between us, if you are open to such a possibility." Lyra felt her heart racing at his words, a complicated mixture of hope and lingering caution rising within her. "I care for you as well, Draven," she admitted honestly. "More than I perhaps expected to feel again so soon after everything that happened with Cade. But I confess some hesitation, born from fear of repeating past mistakes, of trusting too readily, and finding myself hurt once more." "I understand that hesitation," Draven said gently. "And I would never ask you to set it aside before you feel genuinely ready. But know this, Lyra, whatever connection grows between us, I intend it to be built on equal partnership and genuine respect, not obligation or convenience. You would never need to make yourself smaller or less visible beside me, as you once described feeling within Ashwood. I want you fully present, fully yourself, exactly as you are." The sincerity carried within his words settled something uncertain within Lyra's chest, a recognition that this connection, however new and still developing, carried a foundation entirely different from what she had experienced with Cade. Where her bond with Cade had gradually eroded her sense of self, leaving her diminished and increasingly invisible, her growing connection with Draven seemed instead to encourage her fuller expression, her genuine strength and capability, rather than requiring her to suppress them. "I would like to explore this connection with you," she said finally, meeting his gaze steadily, despite the vulnerability inherent in the admission. Slowly, perhaps, but genuinely. Draven's expression brightened with evident relief and happiness at her answer, and for a moment, the powerful Alpha King appeared, simply as a man experiencing genuine joy at connection with someone he had come to deeply care for. "Slowly is entirely acceptable," he said, a warm smile spreading across his features. "I have no wish to rush what I hope might become something lasting and meaningful." Their relationship developed gradually over the following months, built through shared meals, quiet conversations, mutual support during the ongoing challenges of governing Silvermoon Kingdom, and managing the continued fallout from Edric's exposed conspiracy. Lyra found her role within the kingdom expanding naturally, as her gift became more widely known and appreciated, serving as a source of comfort and healing for refugees and troubled individuals who increasingly sought her out, drawn by the same instinctive pull that had first brought 20 desperate wolves to her cabin door. She established, with Draven's full support and resources, a proper sanctuary within Silvermoon territory, a dedicated space where those fleeing conflict or hardship could find genuine safety and support, while working to rebuild their lives. The sanctuary grew steadily over subsequent months, drawing not only from Silvermoon's own territory, but from neighboring kingdoms, as word of its genuine, compassionate care spread throughout the region. It was nearly a year after that first devastating night in the snow, when Draven finally asked Lyra to formally join with him, not merely as a companion, but as his mate and queen, ruling alongside him in genuine partnership. The ceremony, when it finally occurred, differed dramatically from the humiliating rejection that had once marked what Lyra believed would be her final significant pact ceremony. Where Cade's rejection had taken place before a crowd left to silently witness her humiliation without intervention, Draven's proposal and subsequent bonding ceremony unfolded before a community that had come to genuinely value and celebrate Lyra's presence within their kingdom. The sanctuary she had established stood as physical testament to the compassion and strength that had first drawn 20 desperate wolves toward her door, now expanded to serve hundreds who had found genuine refuge and healing within its walls. As dawn broke on the morning of their bonding ceremony, golden light spreading across Silvermoon's central square, where the community had gathered to witness the joining, Lyra found herself reflecting on the remarkable journey that had brought her to this moment. From devastating rejection in the snow, to discovering a rare and powerful gift within her own blood, from confronting the painful truth of manipulation and betrayal, to finding genuine partnership and purpose within a kingdom that had welcomed her, not despite her difficult past, but because of the strength and compassion that past had ultimately revealed within her. Draven stood before her now, his gray eyes carrying the same warmth and genuine respect she had first glimpsed during their earliest conversations, ready to formally bond their lives together as equal partners in leading Silvermoon Kingdom forward. "A year ago," he said, his voice carrying easily across the gathered crowd, "I found a woman who had lost everything. Standing amid 20 desperate strangers, she had chosen to shelter, despite her own devastating pain. In that choice, in that remarkable act of compassion during her darkest hour, I witnessed something I had rarely encountered, even among the most experienced leaders within my own council. Genuine strength, born not from power or position, but from an unshakable commitment to compassion, even when compassion demanded genuine personal sacrifice." Lyra felt tears gathering in her eyes as he spoke, the weight of everything that had transpired since that painful winter night finally settling into something resembling peace, rather than lingering pain. "I ask you now, Lyra," Draven continued, taking her hands gently within his own, "to join with me, not as someone seeking to fill an absence left by past rejection, but as someone I have come to genuinely admire and love for the remarkable person you are. Will you stand beside me, as my equal partner, my mate, and my queen?" "I will," Lyra answered, her voice steady despite the emotion threading through it, "not out of desperation or need for security, but because I have found in you a partner who values my full self, who encourages my strength rather than diminishing it, and who has shown me that genuine love builds rather than erodes the person you become within it." As their bond finalized before the gathered community, sealed through the ancient traditions of their people, Lyra felt the last remnants of pain from that devastating rejection, finally releasing their hold upon her heart. She had walked alone through the snow that terrible night, believing her life had reached its lowest point. She had opened her door to 20 desperate strangers, choosing compassion, even amid her own overwhelming grief. And in doing so, she had discovered not only a rare and powerful gift within her own blood, but a strength within herself she had never fully recognized before. A strength that had ultimately led her toward a partnership and purpose far greater than anything she had known within her former life. The sanctuary she had built continued expanding in the years that followed, becoming known throughout the northern kingdoms as a place where genuine refuge and healing could always be found, regardless of circumstance or history. And at its heart, guiding its continued growth alongside her partner and king, stood the same woman who had once opened her cabin door to a single starving wolf on a desperate winter night, never imagining that simple act of compassion would ultimately transform not only her own life, but the lives of countless others who would follow that same desperate path toward her door in the years to come. Dawn had broken on a night of unimaginable loss, but from that same dawn, something remarkable had grown, proving that even in our darkest moments, the choices we make toward compassion and courage can ultimately illuminate a path toward a future far brighter than we ever dared imagine possible.